I'm Equan from Lunal Graphics, and today we're going to be taking a look at our latest and greatest visual effects tool, Progen Flares 2. Now, lens flare is a very useful effect for digital art because it makes your lights look a lot cooler and frankly a lot more like light. In the past, it's been pretty hard to make your own lens flares for photo manipulation or stuff like that. You'd either have to uh, make your own from scratch using shapes and stuff, which is really hard, and it also ends up not looking that great sometimes. Or you'd have to find a stock photo of a lens flare on a black background, and finding high quality versions of those can be very difficult. But Progen Flares 2 really makes the whole process simple. So to get started, let's head over to the Progen Flares 2 website and open the web app with the Try It on the Web button. So first thing you see on the landing page is that it asks you the dimensions of your image. I would recommend checking the actual dimensions of your PSD file or whatever and plugging it in here. But as long as you've got the aspect ratio right, um, that's what's most important because you can upscale or downscale the output pretty easily. So if we hit create, we'll be taken to the flare editor. Now first let's talk about how to create a flare and apply a preset. So as you can see, I already have this lens flare right here and I can drag it around using the cursor, but I also have this positioning tab right here where I can change the position with light X and light Y, and with these number inputs I can input the exact position that I want the flare to be at. So if you're using guides or something, that can be really helpful so you can pinpoint the exact location you want your light to be. But to apply a preset, all I have to do is come to this use a preset drop down, and we're going to be talking about how to import a file later, but we have so many built-in presets and you can just pick whichever one, see whichever one looks best, and that's it. All you have to do is choose a preset and then hit export. So there's a lot more you can do other than just using the presets. You see there are so many other tabs here where you can customize each component individually. So let's take a look at some of the most common controls you can use and experiment with to change the look of your preset to make your own custom lens flare. So first of all, there's this hotspot tab. That's the rays coming out at the center of the flare. So in each tab, there's going to be an alpha slider, which you can set to 0 to completely turn off the component. And if you increase it, it just changes how opaque that component is. Now there's also an angle slider in every tab, just pretty self-explanatory. You just rotates it. And then there's hue and saturation. This is how we pinpoint the color we want. So if we change the hue, it changes the hue, and saturation changes the saturation. you can experiment with these sliders, but also if there's a very specific color you're going for, you can just find that color's hue and saturation and plug it in here. And then there are some other pretty self-explanatory sliders that you can just experiment with to see if it helps you go for the look you're after. Now, one thing we have is the anamorph slider in pretty much every component. Uh, what that does is if you increase the anamorph, it just flattens out the component. So that can be really helpful for things like anamorphic lens flares where the the flare looks like it's stretched out. So a value of 0 keeps it completely round, whereas a value of 100 is going to flatten it out so much that it's not even there. So in the streak tab, we have thickness and length to control the size. So that way you can control how long it is as well as how tall it is. And then there's also this starring slider, which lets you turn the streak into a star. So at 1, it's just a streak. But when you change the value to 2 or 3, it multiplies the streak so that way you get a star. And it also changes what the shift slider does. So normally, if the starring is at 1, what the shift slider does is it changes how much asymmetry there is in the streak. So if you look at this, when I drag the flare to the left, the streak is much longer on the right than it is on the left. But if I drag it to the right, the streak is much longer on the left than it is on the right. But when I up the starring, what the shift does is changes how much the star rays are offsetted, like that. Alright, now with the ring, there's a pretty cool crop setting that we have. If I choose a preset like Clair de Lune and up the alpha of this ring, I'm pretty sure this is completely unique to Progen flares. No other lens flare generator has this feature that I know of. What you can do is increase the crop size and it'll just cut off the top and bottom of the ring. And then the hardness changes how hard that crop is. So this way it's a very soft effect. And this way it is much more uh, much more hard on the edges, if you will. But this way you can get this kind of like halo-ish effect around the streak, which can sometimes look really cool. Now, multi-iris is probably the most complicated component. Note that for this one, instead of having one one control for the alpha, it's a control for fill alpha and fringe alpha. So what fill refers to is just the shape itself, and fringe is like a little border around it, which makes it look more realistic. So you can control those two separately. There is also a fringe size control right here. Controls how soft the fringe is. and this softness just blurs the iris component. But there are these variance sliders over here. What they do is change how much the randomness affects the size or the alpha or the hue of each individual iris. So if we have the size variance at 0, you'll see that they're pretty much just increasing constantly in size. Now the way you make them increase is actually with this perspective control. So if you have the perspective at 0, they're going to be at all the same size. But when you up the perspective, the iris is closer to the center of the flare, closer to the hot spot, are going to be smaller. And now glow is just a subtle component in the back behind the hot spot. It's just a glow, and you can change the color, the softness. So that's how you can uh, modify presets. I'd recommend experimenting with all the controls, seeing what they do. That way you can get a feel for how you might want to modify them to get the flare you want. Now there's a very useful feature that we have called a reference image, and what this lets you do is modify your lens flare on top of your artwork, so that way you can see in real time how your art is going to be affected. This can really help you uh, get the controls right the first time through. So if we hit the import button, now you'll see that there's our flare is on top of the image. So if I hit this checkbox, I can turn that on and off, because sometimes I might just want it on a black background. But once I enable reference image, first of all, it makes it really easy to drag the flare to the correct position. And now I can see that whenever I modify the flare, I can see exactly what I'm doing to the image. So that can really help make decisions. There's also preview quality. Uh, Low preview quality makes the flare render faster. That doesn't affect the speed of changing the position and whatnot, but it affects things like when I change the attributes of each component. So if I have the preview quality at full, 100%, like changing the size is going to be a little slower. But if I have it at 50 or 25%, it makes it a lot easier to control. Now let's talk about how you can make your own lens flare preset that you can use again and again. So my first recommendation is to choose a built-in preset that's closest to the look you're going for. Um, so maybe we start with this one, and then all you have to do here is change things to make it look the way you want. So maybe I'll make the streak longer, have higher thickness. A recommendation I have for this process is to uh, have a reference image to look at uh, when making your lens flare, so that way it'll be more realistic, but also you just have a much better idea of what you're doing. Maybe I want to change the color, something like this, and If I don't want a component, I can just set its alpha to 0, and maybe I'll make the streak more blue, tune down the intensity. I'll just make the multi-iris smaller, maybe have lower size variance, and have it have 6 edges. And then I can maybe change the color of this as well. So now I have a completely unique lens flare, and if I want to export it to use again in multiple different images, or to save it and share it, all I have to do is click Save Preset, and then now if I choose a different preset, but then I want to load the preset we just made back into the editor, all I have to do is choose Import. Now it's here for us to use again. I really hope this video was helpful, and I really hope you give Progen Flares 2 a try. And if you find it useful and you make something really cool with it, feel free to tag us on social media, because I'd love to see what you come up with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.